What happens when a 13-year-old boy on a rusty bicycle crosses paths with a millionaire stranded on the side of the road? One had nothing but dreams and determination. The other had everything money could buy. But what unfolded in those few minutes wasn't about wealth or cars or even a flat tire. It was about kindness, character, and a life-changing decision that would shock them both. This is a story you won't forget. It was a bright summer afternoon, the kind where the sun paints the fields gold and the air feels heavy with stillness. On a quiet country road, a shiny luxury SUV suddenly rolled to a stop. Inside sat Matthew Evans, a wealthy businessman in his late 70s. He was the kind of man who lived in mansions, traveled first class, and had more money than most people could ever dream of. Dressed in an expensive suit, his silver hair combed back neatly. Matthew had built his life on fortune, reputation, and power. But on this day, none of that mattered. His car had a flat tire, and despite all his wealth, he stood helpless on the side of the road. Matthew cursed under his breath as he stepped out of the car. The road stretched on for miles in both directions, empty, silent, with no gas stations or passing drivers in sight. For the first time in years, the millionaire felt something he wasn't used to: vulnerability. As sweat formed on his forehead under the glaring sun, he glanced around hopelessly. That's when, in the distance, he noticed a boy riding an old, worn-out bicycle toward him. The bike rattled slightly with each turn of the wheel, and strapped across the boy's back was a faded backpack. He couldn't have been older than 12 or 13. The boy slowed down as he neared the stranded man. His eyes were curious, but his tone was calm and polite. "Need some help, sir?" he asked. Matthew raised an eyebrow. He wasn't used to strangers offering him help, especially not a kid. But with no other option, he gave a small, reluctant nod. The boy who knew what to do. The boy introduced himself as Jaden Carter. He parked his bike on the grass and immediately knelt beside the car, examining the flat tire with the focus of someone who'd done this before. "You ever changed a tire before?" Matthew asked, his voice skeptical. Jaden smiled faintly. "Plenty of times. Not on a car, but I fix bikes for people in my neighborhood. The tools are a little bigger, but it's the same idea." From his backpack, Jaden pulled out a small toolkit, clearly well used but neatly kept. Without hesitation, he began loosening the bolts, his small hand surprisingly steady. Matthew watched closely, surprised at how confident the boy was. "You shouldn't be wasting your time fixing problems that aren't yours," Matthew muttered. Jaden shrugged without looking up. "Helping someone isn't a waste of time. My mom always says, if you know how to do something, you should use it to make life easier for others." Those words stuck in Matthew's mind. Here was a kid, no older than 13, showing a kind of wisdom and selflessness that many adults lacked. Different worlds collide. As Jaden worked, Matthew asked him a few questions. "So, where's your family?" Jaden sighed softly, still focused on the tire. "It's just me and my mom. She works 2 jobs to keep things going. I help where I can. I want to be an engineer someday, maybe even design cars like this one. But for now, we just get by." Matthew felt a twinge in his chest. He had grown up in privilege, never worrying about money or opportunities. Jaden, on the other hand, dreamed big while living with so little. "Engineering, huh?" Matthew asked. Jaden finally looked up, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Dreaming doesn't cost anything, and if you work hard, maybe those dreams can come true." Matthew fell silent. He realized this boy, with nothing but a rusty bike, a small toolkit, and a hard-working mother, had more determination than many of the wealthy people he knew. The lesson learned. Within minutes, Jaden had tightened the last bolt and lowered the car back to ground. "There," he said proudly, brushing dust off his jeans. Matthew examined the tire and was impressed. It was a job well done. Reaching into his wallet, he pulled out a crisp $100 bill. "Here, take this, for your help." But Jaden shook his head. "No, sir, I didn't help you for money. You needed help, and I knew how to do it. That's all." Matthew blinked in surprise. In his world, everything had a price. Yet this boy, who had so little, refused payment. "Why would you turn it down?" Matthew asked. Jaden gave a small shrug. "Because sometimes helping someone is worth more than money. My mom says character is what you do when nobody's watching. For a long moment, Matthew said nothing. The boy's words echoed in his mind, louder than any business advice he'd ever heard. He slowly put the money back in his wallet, then extended his hand. "You're a remarkable young man, Jaden," Matthew said. "You reminded me of something I'd forgotten. Kindness doesn't come with a price tag." Jaden hesitated but shook his hand firmly, a seed planted for the future. As Matthew drove away, he couldn't stop thinking about Jaden. The boy had appeared out of nowhere, helped without hesitation, and refused payment with a wisdom far beyond his years. For the first time in decades, Matthew felt inspired not by wealth but by character. Jaden, meanwhile, hopped back on his old bike and pedaled home. He didn't think much of it. To him, he had simply helped a stranger in need. But what neither of them realized was that this brief encounter planted a seed that would grow into something much bigger in the future, an opportunity that would change Jaden's life forever. Because sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest changes, and on that golden summer afternoon, a boy with a bicycle taught a millionaire what true wealth really means. Jaden quickly set his backpack down and crouched beside the gleaming luxury SUV. His small hands moved with a confidence that surprised Matthew Evans. For a boy who looked no older than 12 or 13, he worked like someone who had been through this routine many times before. From his worn-out backpack, Jaden retrieved a small toolkit he carried for his bike repairs. The tools weren't shiny or new. Some were scratched, others mismatched, but they were neatly packed and well used. "You're a mechanic?" Matthew asked, raising an eyebrow, his voice dripping with doubt. He wasn't used to depending on anyone, let alone a kid on a rusty bicycle. Jaden chuckled softly, without looking up. "Nah, sir, but my mom says if you want something done, you better learn to do it yourself. I fix my neighbors' bikes all the time. A car tire's not much different, just bigger bolts and heavier wheels." Matthew folded his arms, still skeptical. "You really think you can handle this?" The boy didn't answer right away. He simply knelt down, gripped the lug wrench firmly, and began loosening the bolts with surprising strength for his small frame. His movements were slow but deliberate, each twist showing that he understood what he was doing. Matthew leaned slightly, watching in disbelief. This boy, dressed in a faded T-shirt and scuffed sneakers, was doing something that the millionaire himself had never even attempted. Matthew Evans was a man who built empires, negotiated multi-million-dollar deals, and controlled companies. But faced with a flat tire, he was powerless. He muttered almost under his breath, "A boy your age shouldn't be wasting his time fixing other people's problems." Jaden paused for a moment, then spoke without looking up. His voice was steady, almost wise beyond his years. "I don't see it as wasting time. Helping someone is never a waste." Those words hung in the air. Matthew felt them hit harder than he expected. For decades, his life had been defined by contracts, profits, and the next big deal. He had rarely thought about the struggles of ordinary people. If someone needed help, he hired staff or paid for services. To him, kindness was just another transaction. But here was this boy, sweaty, dirt-stained, and clearly from a modest background, who didn't ask for anything in return. For the first time in years, Matthew felt something stir inside him. As Jaden continued working, Matthew found himself asking questions he normally wouldn't. "Where'd you learn all this?" Jaden tightened one bolt and glanced up briefly. "From my mom, mostly. She works 2 jobs, so I pick up the little things. If something breaks at home, we don't just throw it away. We fix it. Same with bikes in the neighborhood. I patch them up for the kids. It helps them out, and it helps me learn." Matthew studied the boy carefully. His tone wasn't one of complaint, but of quiet pride. He realized that while Jaden lived with far less than he ever had, the boy carried himself with resilience and responsibility most adults lacked. The boy crouched lower, adjusting the jack. His forehead glistened with sweat under the harsh summer sun, but he didn't slow down. He worked with a kind of determination that came not from obligation, but from character. "You really don't mind stopping to help a stranger like me?" Matthew asked, still baffled. Jaden looked up this time, a small but genuine smile forming on his face. "Why would I mind? You needed help. I knew how to help. That's enough reason. The millionaire fell silent. He thought back to his own childhood. He had grown up surrounded by wealth, private tutors, and opportunities at every turn. Struggle was something he had only read about, never experienced. Yet, despite all his privilege, he couldn't remember ever showing this kind of selflessness at Jaden's age. In his world, people helped others when it benefited them, when there was money, power, or reputation on the line. But this boy who had so little was giving freely, asking for nothing. Matthew realized something uncomfortable in that moment. Despite all his success, he might not truly understand what it meant to live with integrity. Finally, Jaden finished loosening the last bolt, swapped out the flat tire with a spare, and tightened everything back in place. His small hands moved quickly, but he double-checked his work carefully before stepping back. "There," Jaden said proudly, brushing the dirt off his jeans. "You're good to go now." Matthew glanced at the car, then back at the boy. His chest felt heavy, though he didn't fully understand why. This wasn't just about fixing a tire. It was about what the boy represented: hardship, resilience, kindness without expectation. Matthew had spent a lifetime surrounded by people who wanted something from him: business partners, associates, even so-called friends. Yet here stood a boy who gave without asking, and in doing so had reminded him of something he had long forgotten: the value of simple human kindness. For the first time that day, Matthew Evans, millionaire, businessman, man of influence, felt humbled by a child with a bicycle and a toolkit. As Jaden worked, his small hands moving with careful precision, Matthew found himself breaking the silence with a question he hadn't planned to ask. "Where are your parents?" he said, his voice softer this time. Jaden kept his eyes on the tire, his body hunched low as he twisted the wrench. He sighed, not out of annoyance, but as if the weight of the answer was heavier than the bolts he was loosening. "It's just me and my mom," he said finally. "She works 2 jobs. One at a diner, another cleaning offices at night. She does everything she can to keep us afloat. I try to help where I can, fixing bikes, mowing lawns, little stuff that save her time." Matthew felt his chest tighten. He hadn't expected such an answer. He had grown up in wealth, attended prestigious schools, and never once had to worry about whether there would be dinner on the table. Survival had never been part of his vocabulary. It was about growth, profit, luxury. But here was this boy, who should have been carefree, already carrying responsibilities far beyond his age. Jaden continued without being asked, his voice steady, but carrying a quiet determination. "I want to be an engineer someday. Maybe even design cars like this one." He gave the SUV's sleek body a small pat, his eyes filled with admiration. "But right now, we just take it day by day. Surviving is a priority. Dreaming comes after." The words cut deep into Matthew's mind. Here was a child speaking with the wisdom of an adult, shaping his ambitions around hardship instead of privilege. "You fix tires, help neighbors, and dream of engineering, and you're only 13? Matthew asked, his disbelief slipping out before he could stop it. Jaden finally looked up, his forehead glistening with sweat under the summer sun. He smiled faintly, his expression calm and matter-of-fact. "Dreaming is free, right? No one can take that away from you." Matthew stared at him, speechless for a moment. For a man who had spent his life putting a price tag on everything, dreams, investments, even people's time, the simplicity of that statement felt like a thunderclap. Dreaming is free. It was something he himself had long forgotten. The boy bent down again, sliding the spare tire into place. With a grunt, he tightened the bolts, his movements confident, as though each turn of the wrench brought him one step closer to his dreams. His old sneakers were coated with dust, and his small frame bent and strained under the task. But there was no hesitation, no complaint. Matthew found himself watching not just the boy's actions, but his spirit. He thought back to his own youth, when he'd been given everything. A chauffeur to drive him, tutors to teach him, money to cushion every fall. And yet, despite all that privilege, had he ever shown this kind of resilience? Had he ever been this selfless, this determined? The boy gave one final twist of the wrench, then carefully lowered the car from the jack. The tires touched the road firmly again. With a small, satisfied nod, Jaden stood up, dusting his hands on his jeans. "There," he said, stepping back with pride. "You're good to go now." Matthew walked slowly around the car, inspecting the job. Every bolt was secure, the spare was fitted properly, and the vehicle was safe to drive again. He couldn't help but be impressed, not just with the tire repair, but with the boy himself. "You did all this on your own," Matthew muttered, half to himself. No hesitation, no shortcuts. Jaden shrugged lightly, his modesty shining through. "If you're going to do something, might as well do it right." Matthew smiled faintly, but inside he felt something shifting. He had met countless people in his life, business partners, executives, politicians, but none had struck him the way this boy had in just a few short minutes. This child, with no wealth, no privilege, and nothing but a dream, had already taught him more about integrity and determination than most adults ever could. The old millionaire found himself studying Jaden more closely. His bike leaned against the grass at the roadside, its frame chipped, one pedal squeaky from years of use. His backpack was frayed at the edges, yet inside it sat a toolkit carefully cared for and ready to be used whenever needed. Jaden's clothes were plain, slightly faded, but his eyes, bright, steady, and hopeful, were richer than anything money could buy. For the first time that afternoon, Matthew realized that perhaps this encounter wasn't an inconvenience. Maybe it was a lesson, one he had needed for a very long time. As he looked at the boy standing proudly beside the SUV, Matthew knew one thing for certain. He would drive away with more than just a fixed tire. He would drive away with a reminder that dreams cost nothing, that kindness is never wasted, and that sometimes the greatest teachers come in the smallest, most unexpected forms. Matthew Evans, a man who had built empires and signed checks larger than most people's lifetime earnings, reached into his leather wallet and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. It felt like the natural next step. That was how the world worked, wasn't it? You pay for service, and in return, you feel the transaction is complete. He extended the bill toward Jaden. "Here, kid, for your help," he said firmly, as though the money itself could seal the moment. But to his shock, Jaden shook his head without hesitation. His voice was steady, unshaken by the sight of the cash. "No, sir, I didn't do it for money. You were stuck, and I knew how to help. That's all." Matthew blinked. In his 70-plus years, he could not remember the last time someone had turned down money from him. People bent over backward for the chance to earn his favor, his signature, or even a fraction of his wealth. Yet here stood a 13-year-old boy, refusing a bill that could have bought him meals, clothes, or school supplies. Matthew's eyebrows furrowed. "Why would you turn down money?" he asked, his tone laced with genuine curiosity, not judgment. Jaden simply shrugged, his expression calm, almost wise beyond his years. "Because sometimes helping someone is worth more than cash. My mom says character is what you do when no one's watching." Those words didn't just touch Matthew. They shook him. Harder than any lecture at Harvard Business School, harder than any pep talk from CEOs, harder than any award he'd received. He stood there frozen, the $100 bill still hanging limply between his fingers, while the boy's words echoed in his mind. Character is what you do when no one's watching. He thought back to his boardrooms filled with suits, men and women who preached ethics while secretly scheming for bonuses. He thought of the deals he had struck, the shortcuts he had taken, the people who had smiled at him but only because of what he could give them. In that instant, he realized something painful. Most of the people he admired in his circles had less character than this boy standing on the side of a country road. For a long moment, Matthew didn't speak. The silence stretched, filled only by the distant hum of cicadas and the rustle of leaves in the warm summer breeze. Then, slowly, he folded the bill and tucked it back into his wallet. Instead of offering money, Matthew did something he hadn't done in years, something that felt far more personal than a transaction. He extended his hand. "Jaden," he said, his voice carrying a rare sincerity, "you've taught me something I forgot a long time ago. Kindness doesn't need a price tag." Jaden hesitated for a brief second, studying the man's outstretched hand. Then, with a small but genuine smile, he reached forward and shook it. His handshake was firm, confident, the kind that carried more weight than any business deal. For Matthew, it was humbling. Here was a boy with no wealth, no powerful last name, no connections. Yet he carried himself with a strength Matthew rarely saw in men 3 times his age. After the handshake, Jaden grabbed his backpack and swung it over his shoulder, as if ready to continue his journey. His bike leaned against the tall grass, its paint chipped and seat worn, but to him it was freedom, independence, a way to move forward. "You sure you won't take anything?" Matthew asked one last time, not out of habit, but because he truly wanted to give something back. Jaden looked at him and simply said, "I've already got what I need. My mom, my dreams, and the chance to keep moving forward. That's enough." Matthew felt something stir in his chest, something he hadn't felt in decades. Respect, not the kind earned through titles or wealth, but the kind that comes from pure authenticity. The boy mounted his bike, gave a small wave, and began pedaling down the road. Matthew watched him grow smaller in the distance, the sun outlining his silhouette in a golden glow. For the first time in years, Matthew didn't think about his wealth, his companies, or the stock market. Instead, his mind replayed Jaden's words like a song on repeat. Character is what you do when no one's watching. As the boy disappeared over the horizon, Matthew felt a lump in his throat. He realized this wasn't just a random roadside encounter. It was a reminder, a gift, really. In the middle of nowhere, a young boy with a rusty bike had given him something no amount of money could buy: perspective. And in that quiet moment, standing beside his luxury SUV with dust still on the tires, Matthew Evans, the millionaire who once believed money could solve anything, finally understood that sometimes the richest lessons come from the humblest teachers. Before leaving that dusty country road, Matthew had asked Jaden a simple question. "Where do you live, son?" The boy pointed down the horizon, toward a small neighborhood tucked away several miles from where they stood. The houses were modest, some weathered with time, others patched up with care, but it was home for Jaden. Matthew nodded thoughtfully. He didn't say much in that moment, but inside his mind, a decision had already begun to form, one that would quietly but powerfully change the boy's life forever. 1 week later, a week passed. To Jaden, life had returned to its usual rhythm: school, helping neighbors fix their bikes, and waiting for his mom to come home from her long shifts. The encounter with a stranded millionaire felt almost like a dream, the kind of story you tell once and people smile politely, half believing you. But then, one afternoon, the rumble of an unfamiliar engine drew attention to the Carter household. A sleek black car pulled up in front of their modest home, its polished surface shining against the sun. It was the kind of car no one in that neighborhood had ever seen before. Jaden stepped onto the porch, wide-eyed. His mother, weary from work, stood beside him, clutching a dish towel in her hands. And then, to their astonishment, Matthew Evans stepped out, the same man Jaden had helped on the side of the road. Only this time, he wasn't stranded. He looked composed, purposeful, and even a little warmer than before. In his hands was a leather folder. He approached the porch, greeted Jaden's mother with a polite nod, and then handed her the folder with a kind but serious look. Inside were neatly arranged papers. At first glance, Jaden didn't understand what he was looking at, but his mother did. Her eyes widened, her hand trembling as she flipped through the pages. These weren't just any papers. They were scholarship documents. Matthew had arranged for Jaden's entire education to be covered, from high school to university and beyond if needed. Tuition, books, even living expenses, everything was accounted for. It was a golden ticket, something families in their situation could only dream about. Jaden's jaw dropped, his mouth falling open. "Sir, I can't accept this," he stammered, his voice a mix of awe and disbelief. Matthew smiled gently and placed a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "Jaden," he said softly, "you helped me when you didn't have to. You reminded me of values I had forgotten while chasing wealth. The least I can do is help you chase your dream. You told me you wanted to be an engineer. Well, now you'll have a chance." Jaden's mother pressed a hand to her mouth, tears welling up in her eyes. For years she had carried the weight of survival on her back, working 2 jobs, sacrificing sleep, always putting her son's needs before her own. And now, here was a stranger. No, not a stranger, but a man forever changed by her son's kindness, offering a future she had prayed for but never thought possible. Through tears, she whispered, "Thank you. But Matthew shook his head gently, his silver hair catching the light. "Don't thank me. Thank your son. His kindness is what brought us here today. A new beginning." From that day forward, Jaden's life was forever changed. The scholarship not only lifted the financial burden from his family, but it also lit a fire inside him. He threw himself into his studies with a determination no one could shake. His dream of becoming an engineer no longer felt like a fantasy. It was within reach. Years later, Jaden would step into lecture halls at a prestigious university, surrounded by students from privileged backgrounds. But unlike many of them, he carried something they did not. The memory of a summer afternoon, a flat tire, and a lesson about character that reshaped his destiny. And as he studied the mechanics of engines, the designs of vehicles, and the science of innovation, he often thought of the moment that started it all. The kindness he offered without expectation had opened doors money alone could never unlock. Matthew's transformation. As for Matthew Evans, the encounter changed him in ways his closest friends could hardly believe. The man who once measured life in profits and losses began measuring it in moments and impact. He started funding scholarships quietly, helping underprivileged students find paths to success, never one seeking credit. But in his heart, he knew it all traced back to one boy on a rusty bike. A boy who had shown him that true wealth wasn't found in bank accounts or luxury cars, but in kindness, character, and the lives you touch along the way. Legacy of kindness. Jaden Carter went on to design cars that blended creativity with innovation, determined to make vehicles safer, smarter, and accessible for all. His name became known in the engineering world, but to him, the greatest part of the story wasn't his success. It was a simple reminder that small acts of kindness can ripple across time, touching lives in ways you can't begin to imagine. And for Matthew Evans, the millionaire who once believed money could buy everything, that dusty road in the summer sun remained etched in his memory, because it was there, stranded with a flat tire, that he discovered the greatest truth of all. The richest people are not those with the most money, but those with the biggest hearts. Jaden's act of kindness proved that sometimes the smallest gestures can change lives in the biggest ways. What would you have done if you were in his shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story inspired you, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell, because we have more powerful stories just like this one coming your way.